More than 7 years after recreational marijuana shops opened in Colorado, the state legislature is sending a unified message of concern about what high-potency products might do to young people. Lawmakers recently gave final approval to the most sweeping regulatory bill for the cannabis industry since legalisation. It faced almost no resistance in either chamber, passing 56-8 in the House and 35-0 in the Senate. The bill now moves to Governor Jared Polis, a longtime advocate for legalised marijuana and an ally of the industry. Cannabis in Colorado has been legal for medical use since 2000 and for recreational use since late 2012. So what have been the effects on drug usage and health and well-being? Do parents and the general public have sufficient knowledge of this drug, its effects on young people and the industry that promotes it? Laura Stack is founder and CEO of Johnny's Ambassadors.
Before marijuana, Johnny was a computer whiz with a 4.0 GPA and a perfect math score on the SAT. He was a funny, charming, handsome young man with a college scholarship and a bright future. After marijuana, he became psychotic and stole our family dog from our home and threatened to kill it without payment from me, his mother. Hello, I'm Laura Stack, and I have the undesired wisdom of knowing what it's like to lose one's child. By sharing my son Johnny's story of marijuana addiction and suicide, I hope to keep other teens from following his path. The dangerous truth about today's marijuana is the poignant life and death story of my son, Johnny Stack, whose young and vibrant life ended by suicide after his descent into addiction to high-potency marijuana and then cannabis-induced psychosis. You'll laugh and cry with me as I retell the story of Johnny's joyful childhood and then take you through the unthinkable tragedy of his loss. It's every parent's nightmare. This book is a call for parents across America to educate themselves about the risks of today's high THC marijuana products. Johnny's real-life story is backed by recent scientific-based research on how today's potent THC products can lead to mental illnesses such as anxiety, depression, paranoia, psychosis, and sadly, suicidal ideation. I hope to use my pain to help you talk to your children. I pray Johnny's story is a wake-up call to parents and young people who think it can't happen to them.
Laura Stack, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate being here, Mike.
Can you tell us about Johnny's story?
Sure. Johnny was your regular kid, happy, funny, smiling, intelligent. He was very smart. He had a 4.0 GPA. He scored a perfect score in the math portion of our standardized test here in the U.S. called the SAT in math. He had a scholarship to Colorado State University. He played piano. He had a brown belt in karate. He ran cross country. He had his whole life ahead of him, and unfortunately, we live in Colorado, which legalized medical marijuana in 2000 and recreational marijuana in 2012 when he was 12 years old. And at the age of 14, I hit the markets and the high schools. And he had a friend whose brother was 18 and had a medical marijuana card and went to a party and told me he took some, that they wanted to see what it was like to get high, and they had done marijuana. And of course, as all parents do, we told them from a very young age, no drugs, no drinking, no marijuana, it's bad for your brain. And he did not listen, and we told him in no uncertain terms it wasn't allowed in our home, and he wasn't to do it again. And I thought that was the end of it, but unfortunately, he just stopped telling us. And the next few years were full of finding him sneaking out, finding pipes, paraphernalia, having weed in his room, confiscating things. And over the course of the next couple years, he started using more and more. When he was 16 and could drive, it was very hard to keep track of him because he would do it at school. It was very easy to get. And by the time he was 17, a senior in high school, he started having behavioral problems. His grades started to fall. He became very withdrawn and isolated, which was not like him at all, became anxious and depressed. And unfortunately, when he was 18, he had to leave the home. He became verbally abusive, defiant, and we had to move him out of the house because we have other children. So he started dealing. At the high school, he became 18, got his own medical marijuana card. And we found out later after he died on his Snapchat in his For Your Eyes Only section that he was selling the marijuana to the younger kids, just like he did when he was young. He went to the university on his scholarship, and 2 weeks later he was dabbing nonstop and called me and said he felt suicidal. And so we had to withdraw him from the university and put him in a mental hospital where he unfortunately did have a suicide attempt afterward. And then after he came back out, he healed. He was sober, he stopped using marijuana, and he recovered at home. And he said he was ready to go back to another university, so we enrolled him there. And unfortunately, he went right back to smoking marijuana with a new group of friends there. Dabbing, he used concentrates, mostly wax, and also had a dab pen where he vaped a very high potency THC most of the day. And he called a month later and said that his room was bugged and that the university was an FBI base and the mob was after him, and had a complete psychotic breakdown. Had never experienced this before, and put him right back in a mental hospital, and they gave him antipsychotics to control the delusional thinking that he was experiencing, and he again was sober from the marijuana and he recovered. So we tried university number 3, and unfortunately he met up with a girlfriend that he'd known before who was dabbing marijuana every day because she had borderline personality disorder and thought it was helping her. So he took up dabbing again, and unfortunately also stopped taking his antipsychotic. And in November of 2019, he wrote in his journal that the mob was after him and everybody knew everything about him, and he jumped off a 6-story building. So he told us 3 days before he died, he came over to dinner and he said, "I just want you to know that you were right." He said, "You told me that marijuana would hurt my mind, and it has ruined my brain and my life, and I'm sorry, and I love you." So that is the life and death short story of what happened to my son, Johnny, 19 at the time. Took 5 years of progression of marijuana use and so many treatments and doctors and medicines and everything we could do to help him. And he just kept going back. He could not control his addiction and the desire to use marijuana. And I firmly believe that if we didn't live in Colorado where it was legal, he would still be here with us today.
The antipsychotic, was that because of the initial bout with marijuana?
Marijuana in youth, when used at an early age of onset in high frequency and high potency, causes psychosis 5-fold against normal teens who don't use. So because he became paranoid and delusional, they had to give him an antipsychotic to attempt to counter the effects of the marijuana.
What's dabbing?
Dabbing is using a concentrated marijuana. It's not a plant. So in Colorado, flower, weed, grass isn't as popular. They take the plant and run a solvent through it, usually butane or propane, and it causes the THC to leave the plant, and the solution of THC with the solvent is then filtered and dried, and what's left is a waxy like substance, like beeswax or earwax, and it can be processed into additional distillates and different products: batter, butter, shatter. There's different methods like rosin, crystal, which is smoked with a crack pipe. It's pretty much raw THC. So in Colorado, they don't really use weed like we think of. I'm 51, I used marijuana in the 80s, and it was very mild. It didn't have much of the THC, which is the tetrahydrocannabinol, which is what makes one high, THC. It's the chemical in the cannabis plant that causes you to feel high. And so they're just using the chemical here in Colorado. A lot of concentrates, they call them dabs because you only need a dab, just a little bit on a pinhead that you put on a heated device to vaporize it. And it is extremely potent. It's can be pure, nearly 99% THC. So it's no longer a plant. There's nothing natural about the products that are being used here. They are chemicals. So it's very much like taking the coca plant and making cocaine and then turning it into crack. So they take the marijuana plant and they take, cannabis, they have marijuana, and then they turn it into THC. And when you heat THCA crystal, it is THC, and it's nearly pure. So they put it in things. They put it in a lot of things here. Drinks and candies and tampons and suppositories and salad dressing. I mean, anything you can think of that you can use to get into your body. In Colorado, THC can be in it.
You're the founder and CEO of Johnny's Ambassadors, Inc. Can you tell us about the organization's aims, activities, and reach?
Well, I mean, we just didn't know anything about marijuana culture because this is very recent. These dabs have only been out on the market for 5 or 6 years. They've been around, but they just weren't used and they weren't common. And so when we found out that Johnny was using these and saw what they were in his college dorm when we withdrew him the first time, and we just said, what is this stuff? And, we consider ourselves, we were very involved. We both work at home. We always were, we went on vacations. We were here when he left. We were here when he got back. We were very hands-on parents. And we thought, if we can miss this, this can happen to anybody. So after he died, we started doing a lot of research, and we're just shocked at what we found and the harms that marijuana can do to youth because their brains are still forming. We don't get involved with legislation, with if it's legal and you're an adult and you choose to do it, we don't recommend it. It can cause problems for adults just as much as kids, but more so in adolescents because of their very vulnerable, immature brains still forming. So we started a 501c3 to educate parents and teens about the dangers of these very high potency THC marijuana products, particularly in adolescent brain formation and mental illness and suicide. Basically, what happened to our son to keep other teens from following that path. I think there is such a perception that, it's just weed. I did it when I was a kid. I'm fine. And so we're really sounding the alarm out there that this is not just weed. This isn't even in the realm of the same drug. It is a totally different thing, and it's so dangerous for children. And so we have nearly 2,500 now ambassadors who have all said, this is happening to me too, and are forming teams all over the world to share about the harms of marijuana on today's youth, and to try to get parents to understand they cannot allow it, they cannot use it, they cannot give it to their children. They have to fight against having it available where they live. Even in Colorado, where it's legalized, our town opted out. You can't sell it here. There are no dispensaries. And so we're really trying to prevent, as a primary prevention strategy, young teens, youth, sadly, 11, 12, 13-year-olds here in Colorado use. And it has hugely problematic outcomes for them as a result. So johnny'sambassadors.org is our website, and we are working hard to build communities of people who are willing to share their experiences and the message about the problems that marijuana has caused in their lives, in their families, in their children, in themselves, and to bring it out into the open, and not to be ashamed of it, and not to be silenced by it, but to tell people, this happened to me, this is real. Don't do this, it will mess you up. And I shared Johnny's warning now with teens and law enforcement, community, any kind of medical profession. People just don't understand because they're not into marijuana, and they just don't know how harmful it is.
What about resistance? I mean, during my research, there was a story on one news station. They had yourself, and they were talking to a DEA guy. Anyway, there was 13 comments, and they were dreadful comments. They were they were just,
well, because they're using marijuana, so they're vile and violent and mean, and they're really just marijuana doesn't work for them. They're the whole perspective of makes you chill out. It doesn't. It makes people angry, depressed, violent, causes mental harm. So I don't read them. I don't care. I don't read them. I have a very thick skin, and I really actually don't care what people say about me. I stay focused on our mission to save teens and to educate. And if all they can do is insult, that's their problem.
I was talking to a friend of mine about what we're doing, the whole series, and we're talking about marijuana, how bad it is. And it didn't come to fisticuffs, but there was this insistence that I was talking rubbish, you were talking rubbish, the people we had on were talking rubbish.
Reefer insanity.
Yes, and I have some really dear friends, and they say it doesn't hurt you. And
of course they don't, because they are used to their old mental models from long ago, when it was just weed, when it was Woodstock, when it was Easter grass. I did it too. It was nothing back then. And so people are ignorant. They're ignorant, and they think they know, and they don't. They simply don't. They haven't used the products that we have here, most of them. And if you started using the stuff that we have now, when you're 12, it is neurotoxic. It causes brain damage. We know it because we see it. I have many doctors on my scientific advisory board. They have new patients with cannabis-induced psychosis in their office every day with very desperate parents, not knowing what's happening and very scared because their child thinks the parent is a shapeshifter. It's very scary. So I would just kindly tell them that they're ignorant.
But how do you cut through that ignorance?
You try to read, have them read.
But
you show them research. You ask them to watch videos. See, they're very stuck in their own truth, and people like that are not even willing to listen to something counter. And so I usually don't bother with people like that. Because most of them aren't going to change. I am focused on reaching the one person who is going to hear this message and go tell their teen to lay off the weed and that they are not allowed to use it anymore, and put them into treatment and save their life. That's the person I want to reach.
Tell us about Big Marijuana. Who are the people and organizations behind it, and the markets they're focused on?
Well, I mean, it's a hugely, profitable industry. It is an addiction for profit industry. And so the people who are in on it are the ones who are making the money on it. And so they are the tobacco companies that are now into marijuana. They are the beer companies that are now starting to make marijuana beverages. They're the billionaires that, like John Sperling and George Soros and Peter Lewis and the people who were really kind of investing in it. It's the Drug Policy Alliance. There are some key organizations like the DPA, like the National Cannabis Industry Association. There are a few like the Marijuana Policy Project. These are all organizations that are determined to legalize marijuana. I blame them. They're carpetbaggers. They are willing to sacrifice the health of our children on the altar of their profits. Normal, Hugh Hefner, there's all kinds of people that we can blame. Robert Corey, who's the one who was the attorney that started Amendment 64 here in Colorado. I blame him. I blame the pot doctor, the pot shop, just like the old pill mills that used to prescribe opioids. Now you pay your $500, you go tell a pot shop doctor you got a migraine when you're 18 and you've never had a health problem in your life, and they're protected in Colorado, and they give them a medical marijuana card, and they go to the dispensary and they buy it. And then they go back to the high school and they sell it to all the younger kids at a profit. So, they don't need the black market. They don't need to grow it inside their house. They're buying it legally with a medical marijuana card. So there's a huge problem with 18-year-olds able to go buy shatter 2 grams a day. Then they go to another dispensary, buy 2 more grams, and another one. They don't track it. There's no testing. There's no regulation. They just loop from dispensary to dispensary, and they become the local high school drug dealers. In 5 minutes in any high school in Colorado, you can get your hands on weed. And I blame all of those people and those organizations that have done this to our children and don't care about public health. They're using them as their guinea pigs because they need them to be addicted, because you don't just suddenly develop a cannabis use disorder when you're an adult. Most drug addictions begin as youth.
When they say it ain't about the money, it really is about the money, which goes to question your the various state governments and the federal government. There really
the tax money and
doesn't seem to be a whole lot of resistance from upstairs, does it?
Well, I have gone to the Capitol myself many times and yelled and screamed and talked to the Senate minority leaders, majority leaders. I've talked to congressmen, our representatives, our senators, our attorney general's office, and I just share Johnny's story. And we have to speak up. We have to be heard. We have to make a lot of noise and shout about it very loudly, because they try to shame you, these people. Oh, well, it must have been because you were a horrible parent, and your kid was, must have been mentally ill before he used marijuana. They just say a bunch of BS that isn't true. I mean, I wasn't a perfect parent, but I was a good mom. I don't, I didn't force it down his throat. There's just a lot of blame and shame that goes on in an attempt to keep people like me quiet. And I'm not going to be quiet.
More like attack the person and not the evidence.
Yeah.
The evidence does speak for itself. You mentioned George Soros. I mean, it's interesting with George Soros. He tends to be a destroyer of most civilizations if he gets his way. How do you counter? I mean, the George Soroses and all these multi-billionaires. How do you counter their insistence on making money out of the misery of others?
Well, I mean, they have done a very good job by calling it medical, and getting people to say, oh, the poor children who need it because they have seizures. Look, I'm not trying to take away. There are components of the cannabis plant that can be helpful for certain disorders that the FDA has approved that are chronic. For example, seizures and certain cancer pain. And, so there are some things. But what people don't understand is that in November of 2020 in Colorado, there were only 131 medical marijuana cards for children 0 to 10 years old. We're not trying to get rid of the parents' ability to give children who get an actual prescription from a doctor to use, and there are FDA approved medications, Epidiolex, et cetera. And then from 11 to 17, there are 140 medical marijuana cards. So that's not what the problem is. And so what we're really looking at is magically at 17 years, 364 days, to 18 years, now there are 3,900 medical marijuana cards. So what, in one day, an 18-year-old developed a chronic a medical condition. So they're not supposed to be prescribing. They're prescribing them, I believe, criminally to make money, to get them to use the product, to get them addicted. Very few users in Colorado use most of the product. So you need your chronic users. So you've got to addict them, you've got to addict them hard, and you've got to addict them young. And then they need more, and they need more potent, and they need more quantity. And that's where they're making all of their money. They're not making their money off of the 12-year-old who has seizures, or the 65-year-old grandma who needs her gummy each day because she has back pain, right? That's not where they're really making their money.
Do we just stop it, make it illegal, and that you get your medical marijuana from the doctor, or how do we approach this problem? And it is a massive
there's a
problem.
lot you can do. I mean, I don't think it'll ever stop. You can't just stop it. I mean, the horse is out of the barn, right? So there's a lot of things that you can do legislatively, and so making sure your town doesn't allow dispensaries, putting caps on potency, requiring 2 doctors for an 18 to 20-year-old to sign off on the med card, requiring a bona fide physician-patient relationship where the patient has to go back every 3 months and be recertified that they can take that. Tracking systems where it's just like opioids, where when you buy your marijuana, your name goes in and you can't go from dispensary to dispensary and buy. They call that looping here in Colorado. You just have to keep putting forward lobbyists, having people on your side in the legislature who are sympathetic to these problems, show them the research, Talk to every single person you know. Remove the protection from the doctors. Give parents, I don't even know who gave my child a medical marijuana card, right? You can't get alcohol, you can't get cigarettes till you're 21, but you can get a medical card when you're 18. So there's just a lot of things that you have to just keep working at one at a time and just keep hammering at them.
How can we then support Johnny's Ambassadors Inc.?
Well, we don't have any grants. We're brand new. We're not even a year old. We don't have any government funding. We don't have any funding. We don't. We're just private donors. We're just a group of people who are concerned around the globe, and so we are funded by individuals who share in our mission. So we gratefully take donations from all over the world. johnnysambassadors.org/donate. There's a donate button on our website. But more than that, just to join us, get involved. You know, we've got a very active Facebook group. We have a Stop Dabbing Walk. We use hashtag Stop Dabbing. That will be held globally. We've got some teams already in Australia, several in Canada, in Kenya. I think we have 11 teams so far, and some that are committed. It's Sunday, September 19th this year. StopDabbingWalk.com. If they go to StopDabbingWalk.com, they can sign up a team. You know, so that's what we really need to do, is get the word out there, have an effort, much like MAD or Mothers Against Drunk Driving. You know, we need a coalition of people who are vocal from all sides and who make people pay attention and hold people accountable to the science, and stop listening to the money and listen to the doctors. Peer-reviewed journal studies, not surveys, you know, not all the fake stuff that the pot industry puts out. And then have organizations like some of our allied partners who pay lobbyists, you know, and get schools on board and doctors on board, and associations in the medical profession on board, and make a stink and show up to every hearing, every committee hearing. You know, we're just trying not to let things move out of committee at this point. And we're a 501c3, so I can't get involved in lobbying, but we can educate, and we can share our stories, and we can hold our legislators accountable.
From a tragedy, a terrible tragedy, to a journey of inspiration. Laura, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being able to share Johnny's story.